with Assad's regime's gone, and I do love starting almost every single show with that statement, there are new sort of battles to fight. What we've seen in the specifically the northeastern parts of Syria, where the sort of Kurdish forces or the Kurdish-led forces and people are. In the last few days, we've seen the Turkish-backed militias and some of the rebels attacking some of the cities, some of the sites where the Kurds are. And now, the sort of since the whole goal of Turkey's involvement in the Syrian civil war was to was to basically put down the Kurdish forces, was to create some sort of buffer zone between Turkey and the Kurdish forces. Now, the real question is, especially with not really sure yet about what the other rebels will want, what specifically the HTS, while they claim to say that diversity is their strength, not their weakness. So, the kind of DEI jihadists. We won't really know what they will do, how they will try to pursue the future of Syria in the next upcoming days, weeks, or months. So the question is maybe a bit pessimistic, but are Kurds in Syria doomed? Hopefully not. And we'll talk about parts of it as well. The sort of the interests of the Kurds, the American soldiers in there, the American bases in there, as well as Israel itself. Joining me today is Michael Kaufman, Marco, and Richard. Welcome to the reality show. Let me also remind people that today's episode of the reality show is sponsored by Jim Brown's new book, A Black Hole in Economics, Money Creation and Its Consequences. More about that later in the video. So, Michael, I don't think you've been on since Assad's regime's fall apart. So maybe just some of your brief thoughts about well, one, are you surprised? And also, yeah, just your general thoughts so far.
Well, it's nice to see another dictator. It's a shame he didn't bite the dust. Hell of a job by Russia with the plane that quote went down, which was a diversion, apparently an intelligence diversion. And no surprise that this horrendous person who has the deaths of millions of people on him is being housed in Russia. It's a little like the Nazis being housed in various South American countries afterwards. You can always find somebody who's awful. It's phenomenal. I don't think anybody expected this thing to fall, Syria to fall like that. I mean, it was like watching a fast movie from the time they knocked out the first city to the time the rebels took over Damascus. I think the thing that surprises me the most is to see the impressive Israeli onslaught while they're fighting, at least two other wars. There's been an amazing bombing campaign to make sure that a lot of the weapons depots and chemical weapons facilities, you remember the Obama Red Line, all of those facilities that it was a typical Obama Red Line where you cross it and nothing happens. So they're all being bombed. And even the US has had a much more vigorous response to what's going on in Syria, to the American hostages being taken in Gaza. But I think we're all very glad to see him go. Obviously, we're all worried about what is going to replace him and what the real status of HTS is. Are they still Alawites, crazy Islamists, or have they really, they've spoken a good game, and they've certainly talked about even being open to the notion that women shouldn't be suppressed, which is a breakthrough, and that they're going to let other people in. So I'm optimistic. I mean, we clearly needed to change if anything was going to get better. This probably can't be any worse. It's nice to see Israel with the incursions and taking over places near the border, and I'm hopeful something good happens. We'll talk about the Kurds in a little bit, but hopefully the Kurds can also get something good out of this as well.
Yeah, maybe I can just mention when it comes to HTS, which is one of the biggest rebel groups and the sort of the ones who seem at least pragmatically, sort of. Oh, and we lost Marco and Richard. Seem at least pragmatically to be a bit more sort of reformed, sort of more multicultural, sort of respecting of minority groups. Something that because you mentioned they speak words, and maybe for their benefit, I should also say that also the way they sort of waged this last week or 2 weeks, the way they waged the war was also in that sort of, don't execute prisoners of war, don't just massacre random civilians. It was don't plunder all the cities. So even the way they waged the last 2 weeks has also been in this more, let's say, better. It was led in sort of a better way. So again, because I don't know, Michael, if you know, but someone accused me of spreading Russian propaganda because I said HTS is like a jihadi group, and I didn't believe that they might be fully reformed. I'm a bit pessimistic about a terrorist group coming out of Al Qaeda, just like having a change of heart, and I'm happy. I'll be happy to be proven wrong, of course. But even then, if you have, let's say, a group that is fully reformed, that is fully, let's say, maybe not democratic, but respecting of individual rights, or sorry, minority rights, not individual rights, is still a high concept. Even that's the case if it's sort of like similar to the Palestinians and Hamas. When you have the more reformed group, are the people there actually willing to support the more reform? Are they also in the better state? So I mean, again, hope for the best, but sort of now going, let's say, starting with the sort of American interest. So Biden has said, as we all turn to the question of what comes next, the United States will work with our partners and the stakeholders in Syria to help them seize an opportunity to manage the risk. Now, again, I'm not 100% sure who he was referring to when it comes to stakeholders. I think Kurds are the clear that he might have been referring to them, but he might have been referring to some other groups. Also, just to mention, Syrian opposition reports that the U.S. military has issued a warning to the and I love these shorts. Issued warnings to SNA and HTS not to encroach on SDF areas in Deir ez-Zor and Raqqa. So SNA is the Syrian National Army. Despite the name, it's not actually like Assad's army. Syrian National Army, I believe, are the Turkish or is the opposition that is being supported by Turkey, and HTS is of course the one of the main sort of Islamist rebel groups, and SDF are the Syrian Democratic Forces, which is the sort of united name for the Kurdish-led armed forces. It is claimed that U.S. is basically already taking interest by saying don't do anything to the Kurds, because there were already some fights both from the Turkish parts, because Turkey wants to establish basically a zone between the Kurdish parts and Turkey. But I mean, Michael, what do you think about this Biden statement, sort of like, let's say, taking a position, if we can call it that, and sort of at least implying that something already did happen, and we haven't seen anything yet, but sort of saying that something will happen if the Kurdish parts are something happens to them.
Well, don't forget, Biden is very good at saying don't, and the world is very good at laughing at him and doing whatever the heck they want. Um, Hezbollah did, Iran did, and the Houthis did. And there's people in Iraq that did. So, other than pretty much every enemy of America and Israel that did when Biden said don't, he's really doesn't scare anybody. He's a lame duck president. It's the typical alphabet soup of the U.S. State Department. Instead of really doing something. I mean, I think it's more impressive the fact that there have been, I think, over 100 sites that have been bombed by U.S. forces in Syria already, that might have been ISIS strongholds, and we don't know if there were other chemical weapons depots and so on and so forth. This is a pretty remarkable response, which for America, because we don't do stuff. We have a ton of people in the area. We didn't do anything about the Houthis to speak of. It certainly didn't have any effect. We didn't do anything about the American hostages in Israel. Forget the I'm sorry, in Gaza. Forget about the Israeli hostages in Gaza, but the Americans actually in Gaza. We didn't do anything except talk a lot and talk about ceasefires and things. But the U.S. military seems to be doing something. This doesn't feel like Joe Biden to me. This seems like a transitional government move, and Trump doesn't want to have to deal with ISIS when he comes back, and that I think is the biggest concern that America has said they have. The second part of this whole thing is I think that Turkey is part of NATO, and this is one of the most difficult situations I think we've had. Turkey is become a rogue state. They are absolutely anti-American. They're anti-Israeli. They're anti-democratic. It's become a terrible regime for women. They're getting more and more religious, and Erdogan is a disaster, in my opinion. And anybody who likes freedom and democracy, he's clearly, I mean, he's setting them back terribly, and he's actively colluding with Russia. And frankly, I know he's talking to Iran and China. We all know that. I mean, it's all over the place. This is remarkable for a NATO member. Of course, under Biden, this is all put up with, and we don't talk about it because somehow it'll make it all go away. But those are I thought, and I think Turkey, you're right. Turkey is very anti-Kurd, um, and they're going to be in trouble if he does anything. That said, if America really stands up, and it may be under Trump that, nice thing about being a guy like Trump is that you've set off missiles enough times that people believe you're actually going to use them, and that can do a lot to dissuade your enemies.
Yeah, I mean, so yeah, we are in this weird period of basically, Biden still being the president, still having the full powers of president, but he is basically on his way out. Trump is already the acting president. Trump is already, meeting with Zelensky, for example. He's already meeting with some world leaders, already talking about the future. And so the question sort of is, to what extent do Biden's sort of threats even matter? I mean, if somebody tells me, if you do something, something bad will happen to you. If I know the guy won't be here in a month, to what extent does that threat matter that much? Especially when I think Trump said that we shouldn't really be involved in Syria, or basically said that the U.S. shouldn't really take sides. And sort of just to mention the sort of the stats, let's say. So U.S. has some 900 troops in eastern Syria, whose mission is to work with the Syrian Democratic Forces to battle the Islamic State. I mean, that's what, Michael, you mentioned. And also, um, so the U.S. Bombers and fighters carried out dozens of airstrikes against Islamic State camps and operatives in central Syria on Sunday. In all, 140 ammunitions were dropped on more than 75 targets, the senior administration official said. So again, something sort of really incredible to see. I'm sort of wondering why we almost had to wait until now. There might be, because I think where the ISIS forces were was technically under sort of under Assad's regime, like in his like sort of territory. So there might have been like basically flight restrictions, worry, and now you can pretty much just go in. So I think when it comes to American interests, completely eliminating ISIS is, I think, an absolutely clear and a sensible goal here. Um, but I mean, Marco, you guys were out for about 15 minutes. What do you think about uh, let's go back to Turkey then. What do you think about sort of Turkish interests or interests sort of when it in the Kurdish parts of Syria, especially since we are at this stage where uh, sort of Biden is saying to the Syrian National Army, don't do anything to the Kurds, while that the Syrian National Army is supporting by the Turkey, which is the ally of the US. So it's basically saying to the ally of your ally, don't attack my ally.
Yeah, it's typical typical Western the diplomacy, isn't it? I mean, first of all, it's called lame duck president at this point for a reason, and nobody will listen to him, as you mentioned earlier on. And the problem here is that everybody, while there's this kind of fluid situation going on, while there isn't a government in Syria, is kind of taking advantage of the situation and trying and further their interest. And I quite welcome the bombing that Israel has done to take out, as Michael was saying, the chemical installations. I more than welcome the bombing on ISIS that the US have done. But certainly the fact that the US decided to withdraw, or at least say that they're not going to support the Kurds anymore, effectively allowed Erdogan to take over and to try to turn his faction against the SDF.
Sorry to jump in. In what way was it said that? Because I have that Biden said that don't do anything to the Kurdish forces.
Yeah, but already in October there was a bit of a decision. In fact, there was a bit of a split. That's the first time when Netanyahu and the US weren't quite agreeing on the foreign policy, because they withdrew the support from the Americans effectively meant that the Kurds were without really cover. And of course, Erdogan took advantage of it straight away. That might have precipitated the issue, I don't know, but we know that Erdogan has never really missed a chance to attack the Kurds who are in the south of Turkey. I mean, he's been attacking Kurds for as far as back as I can remember. Not him himself, but the Kurds have been under fire from Turkey, and the problem that where ISIS is, where the Kurds are effectively providing a buffer between. They kind of in the northeastern panhandle of Syria, which goes right into Iraq. And we know that Iraq has been facilitating transport of weapons from Iran into Lebanon and to Hezbollah. And this, of course, was supporting Assad as well. And this kind of situation is a bit, I think it is a bit myopic for the US to do something like that. They shouldn't allow this kind of vacuum to form, because exactly the people in the area, what kind of groups they are, what they're after, and by leaving some sort of sign that you're not as strong as you were, you guarantee you're going to be hit.
I think if you look at what sums up the situation now, the word that springs to mind is the scramble, because there's a scramble on all sides to reassess where you are, to reposition who is your enemy, who is your current best ally that you can work with for now. Where is the future risk that's suddenly been exposed by this change of regime in such a rapid manner? And I think the lessons of the past have at least been taken on board by countries like Israel and the US, by making sure that the serious weaponry that has existed under a previous regime is completely wiped out as quickly as possible, or much of it is wiped out as quickly as possible in this mad scramble period, rather than holding back and letting things fall into place first, and then trying to pick up the pieces when people have already got allies and on the other side. That's the difficulty you're facing at the moment. I think so the damage limitation of making sure that you've taken those things out right now, just while everybody finds their place, that's absolutely vital. I think what's going on in other ways you can look at in different ways. I think a lot of what's happened says a lot about Russia at the moment. It talks about how weak Russia is, that it's had to withdraw, that it's not been able to support Assad, how overstretched it is in Ukraine by its own fault, of course. No sympathy for them, but and of course the fact that they are having to consider whether they can retain their bases or not on the Mediterranean. We'll have to see to what extent they attempt to defend that position there. I think so what interests me about this in particular is you've got the Assad, the dictator, falling, but you've got the effect on other dictators. You've got the effect on dictators like Putin, for example, and what I just said about Russia. You've got the effect on dictators generally, because they've seen how quickly dictatorships can suddenly fall again. They've seen that it took just 2 weeks for a 50 plus year dictator and the 24 years of Bashar himself to come to an end in 2 weeks. So that's going to have an effect on all sorts of people, like Iran, like North Korea. You're going to know that you're going to have a greater sense of paranoia. Some of it justified, some of it not. It's going to make you make all sorts of irrational decisions, which is what dictatorship is based upon, ultimately anyway, is on the irrational decision of thinking you can stay in charge through force. And of course, you've got the sort of dictator adjacent type people like Erdogan himself. Now, maybe, you can argue he doesn't fit in the same category as an Assad or as a, Kim Jong-un or someone like that. But nevertheless, he is certainly using the opportunism to exploit Syria, as so many players have done. And that's only heightened in this period of scramble that we're talking about, where Syria has been everybody's plaything. It's been everybody's opportunity to muck around with, to use as a training ground for their own purposes, to use for supplying weaponry and getting benefits one way or another, favors from a dictator or who's been in place up until now. So I think Erdogan being opportunist, using this chance to try and push the Kurds back in some form because of their PKK link and all the rest of it. That's no surprise, but that's why there needs to be support from the other allies to the Kurds, at least while things settle a bit. But of course, all of that is under the caution of how much you get involved and how much you allow things to play out themselves. But of course, intelligence is the key to this whole thing, making sure you've got the best feel possible, best understanding possible of who each of the players are, what their aims are, as opposed to what they say their aims are, and therefore give you the best chance of predicting the future and reacting to it.
Yeah, and sort of the idea of dictators falling, it really reminds me from the history of the French Revolution, when sort of all the absolutist monarchs in Europe realized, oh my God, we can actually just be gone from one day to the other, or in just a couple of days or a couple of weeks. And yeah, I mean, that for that part, that is great to see. I mean, if you really look at, I mean, Iran and Russia specifically in this part, they both pretty much went, and Russia much more, went from, Russia, the second biggest army in the world or the second strongest army in the world, to having to pull out of Syria, not being able to, conduct the 3-day military operation in Ukraine, not being able, needing help from North Korea, needing help from Iran, needing help from these, other dictatorial nations that themselves are basically just paper tigers. If only we realize it. And it really leads to, we'll do an episode later this week about basically the fall of Iran, or the fall of Iran's proxies, because yeah, I mean, Israel was able to, in just 1 year, almost completely wipe out Iranian influence across the Middle East, and sort of really make them afraid, really, sort of reminding you of that video when I'm not sure if it was, I think it was Khomeini who, at the funeral of the last president was like looking up, just like making sure nothing's coming at him. And that's great to see. So I guess now going into I'm wondering, let's just go around the table, because I'm wondering what you guys think. If, once Trump comes into office, we still have a month and a half about, so there's still a lot of time. This offensive has happened in just 2 weeks or so. So we have no idea what might happen. We have no idea. As I've said on the Daily Objective, we don't necessarily know if the Syrian civil war is over. I mean, Assad is gone, but it is not yet united. The sort of there is an idea of a transitional power when the rebels become the official government, but there's still a bunch of different rebels as well as the Kurdish parts, so we'll have to see. But Michael, I'm wondering, what do you think? So Trump has said, I think he said 2 days ago on X, that the US should stay clear of the strife in Syria. This is not our fight. Do not get involved. And with sort of the way Trump speaks, it can be understood pretty well in some way, basically saying, don't support jihadists just because they dislike Russia or they dislike Iran. That would be sort of the better way. But a sort of let's say the more ignorant way, forgetting that there are already bases in Syria, and there are active threats against US in Syria when it comes to ISIS. So I mean, Michael, what do you think we'll see? Of course, it's hard to predict since we have no idea what the situation will be back then. But what do you think we'll see from the upcoming Trump administration when it comes to Syria?
Well, I think Trump is dedicated to isolating and hopefully taking out Iran, whether that's purely economic sanctions, which he will maximally reinstall and he will stop. I think he'll send naval ships in to blockade the oil exports. And I think he'll restore all of the Trumpian sanctions that were there that bankrupted Iran and that Biden so cleverly reversed the entire thing so as to, I don't know, enable Iran. It's hard to understand what genius arguments the Biden State Department came up with to do what they did. But I think the fall of Syria, first of all, and we didn't really touch it before, is yet another of the Iranian axes of resistance that was destroyed, and was destroyed in, like you said, a much shorter period of time than anyone would have given credit. I think separately, Trump says a lot of stuff, and I personally, I don't love Trump, but I love most of his actions. And I think Trump tends to just blab off. I don't like that. I don't think the leader of the free world should do that, but he is a leader. And he's not one of these Obamian leader from behind kind of baloney that Obama tried to perpetrate. What's going on right now in Syria vis-a-vis the U.S., and as you mentioned, there have been probably the most aggressive U.S. attacks in the Middle East since the whole October 7th war began. I mean, it's hard to think of a time when U.S., at least on the news, that the U.S. was actually bombing anybody at this extent with this intensity in such a short period of time. And this doesn't feel like Joe Biden to me. It certainly doesn't feel like the words of Joe Biden going along. And it's a little hard for me to believe that Biden would be doing this on his own without tacit or active approval from Trump and his team behind the scenes saying, we don't need a resurgence of ISIS, because that will lead to American hostages being taken and Americans being beheaded on national TV and international TV. And that's not what Trump wants to project. So I think Trump really gets that. You're right. Trump doesn't want to be seen as someone who's supporting al-Qaeda. And right now, HTS is an al-Qaeda descendant. It's a daughter of al-Qaeda. It's like saying, well, it's a cancer cell, but it's not as aggressive as the last cancer cell, so we should be nice to it. And I think that's possibly, if you want to give Trump the benefit of the doubt, that's possibly what's going on. But the last point I want to make is that if Trump truly believes that he has to isolate Iran and be done with this whole ridiculous Iranian question of are they going to get nuclear weapons, which clearly Biden would have allowed and was allowing, and not only that, but enabling, then you have to believe that he's glad that Assad is gone because it's another Iranian axis. And you also have to believe that he understands that the entire Iranian paper tiger is just that it has all been trumped up, no pun intended, by so-called military experts and State Department diplomacy experts, that Iran is amazing. They have an amazing army. They have an amazing military. And Israel has proven beyond a shadow of a doubt that not only are the disciples of Iran, Hezbollah, Hamas, and so on, weaker than we thought, and now Syria, but Iran itself is naked today. And I do believe that if Trump were the president, that we would see American and Israeli attacks on Iran, including both the nuclear sites and the oil fields, probably more the nuclear sites than the oil fields. And I would be shocked to see Donald Trump not doing things that would support anything that's anti-Iranian.
Yeah, and talking about not just the American strike, I mean both Israel and America have really struck within Syria, uh, either ISIS or the ammo depots or the chemical plants. Really, and it's they were sort of able to get away with it, if you want to call it that, on the international scene, because in one way it's the ISIS, no one's gonna stand behind the ISIS, and on the other side it was it was chemical plants that could be used by the rebels, and so in both ways it was sort of accepted by the international scenes. But again, there's why can we not see the same thing in Iran? There is virtually very little difference fundamentally between ISIS and Iran. Just one has a seat at the UN. That's pretty much the only difference you can really find, and it really shows how when you do something, when you have the moral clarity, when you are able, you are willing to just destroy the threats to your people, to the individuals in your nation, you can just do it. Nothing stops you. And uh, I again, I'd love to see something similar with Iran, because everything behind everything is Iran. The way Hezbollah has been able to get supplied from Iran was through Iraq and Syria, which Iran has influence in. The Houthis attacking international shipping, again, supported by Iran. So trying to saying that Houthis and Hamas and Hezbollah are terrorist groups, and yet looking at Iran as a legitimate country which is supporting these groups is basically a pathway to hell. But I mean, Marco, yeah, any thoughts?
Well, it's a bit of a mess, isn't it? Because you also have Russia in the mix. And the fact that Russia and Iran are newly pals because they're both member of the BRICS, they can easily exchange some kind of weaponry or whatever with the excuse, oh, we're just doing a trade as we're allowed to do it. So that kind of complicates things a bit. And the fact that, as you mentioned, Russia has got a couple of bases on the Mediterranean, uh, could well be that Russia will try and sway the new administration coming in to be friendly to them. Again, we've been told the story, we've spun the story that Iran and Russia are this kind of formidable things we can't possibly poke because they're going to slap us back and they're so evil and powerful. Well, it turned out that Putin has been slapped in the face by the Ukrainians for the last nearly 3 years. That's quite a significant thing that you would never, ever, ever guessed in 2001, sorry, in 2021, that this would have happened. But that's the reality of it. So the fact that Iran is as well being exposed as a paper tiger, it goes to show that I don't believe for a second they're not going to try and influence via ISIS through Iran or whatever routes they're going to take, again, to put some pressure on the newly formed government, whatever form it's going to be. Because bear in mind that it's going to be a coalition of very bad actors. It's going to be a coalition of former Islamists. It's going to be a coalition of former ISIS and al-Qaeda people. So not much will come out from this thing. I can tell you what's not going to happen. It's not going to be a congress of factions that decide to take a US-style constitution and put the freedom of the individual at the center of it. That guarantees not going to happen. And Iran is going to be trying to play its card in order to keep control, or at least some kind of hook into Syria itself. And of course, we saw that the strike in Damascus in the consulate when an IRCG guy was taken out by Israel, which then prompted the first ballistic missile attack from Iran into Israel. Israel was already operating to some extent in order to target certain precise points. And the fact that at this stage, everybody is taking a pot at facilities or interesting or soft areas in Syria, it's good, but it's not a coordinated thing. It's everybody's kind of try and get away with whatever they can get away with. And as I mentioned earlier on, it's a good thing that this is happening. But what we want to see is something a bit more coordinated, something a bit more of an approach that means that by doing this, we're gonna make sure that Iran will never ever fund all those kind of supporters of evil throughout the area. And of course, doing this kind of backseat driving that Iran has been doing takes lots of effort. I mean, having proxies means that you have to have a massive control over them, and the logistic effort is quite intensive. And I'm sure that once Trump is in place, either because of the Houthis or because of something happening in Syria or Iraq even, they will deal with Iran once and for all, I think. I'm pretty positive that looks to me like they're just waiting for an excuse to hit Iran as soon as they do something stupid, and they will, because that's what they do. They'll be hit on the head, and frankly, that's never going to be too late.
Iran has never looked more exposed than it has in recent times. The window has never been more appropriate than now, and the urgency is never more necessary than now. And all of those things combine to mean that Iran really should be receiving some missiles from the sky on its nuclear facilities all over the place, and setting it totally unable to create nuclear capability moving forward, and that's what I hope to see. And I'm pretty sure that when you look at Trump's emails and when it is his tweets, etc., or his truth socials, whatever, all of those, they're directed at several different audiences at once, aren't they? Many of them are directed at the Biden administration right now, because there's still the opportunity for one administration to shaft the next, or at least to make some stupid errors. And of course, we hope, and as you made the point earlier, it looks as if the State Department and the Defense Department is making some sensible decisions at the moment, and that's probably does show some coordination behind the scenes. So that's good. And good to see. What the language that Trump speaks to the Middle East and to people like ISIS is based on his actions in the past, like bombing the bejesus out of them with the biggest weaponry, non-nuclear weaponry. That's what took them out. They haven't forgotten that, and no tweet of any kind saying we shouldn't get too involved is going to counter the memory of that. And the knowledge that he could do that again and would do that again if he thought it would change the dynamic significantly. So all of that leads me to hope that there's a possibility that we're going to move to a better place from here. But of course, there is also set against that all of the jostling for position with all of these factions within Syria itself, and the ever-present jihadism and Islamicism in that region, which is always ready to rear its head in any vacuum. And when we're told by the leader of this potentially the new regime within Syria that he's not going to have women forced to wear, certain clothes or hijabs, etc., or have morality police or all of those kind of things. Yeah, sounds great, but is that just a little distraction? So yeah, we're going to look like we're Western, but so don't need to look too closely. But who knows what he's really planning at this stage? That will only come in time.
Yeah, if I can just add two quick comments to Marco's and Richard's great comments. I think if Trump restores the sanctions and prevents oil exports from Iran, this will crush Iran's economy. You can't really fund anybody. You can't really have axis of evil and terrorist organizations if you can't fund them. I mean, all these are not people that have regular jobs that are going to go back and be accountants and storekeepers and doctors and lawyers. These are people that only go and they kill people for money, and most of them don't even believe all the religious crap that that this stands under. So cutting off Iran's income for the Ayatollah, they're not the people of Iran, which, by the way, apparently a lot of them do want to overthrow the Ayatollah, and certainly any woman that wants to have any meaningful, at least have the option of having a meaningful life, um, would want to. But you have to have money to do this. And I think the second point, so that's critical. That is a critical part of it, and the fact that Biden reversed those sanctions for no good reason that anybody can come up with. I'm sure they all said they would come to the table and they would stop doing what they're doing. No, they haven't stopped doing what they're doing. And I think the second point is that nature abhors a vacuum, and as Marco and Richard have said beautifully, you need to have leadership in the world. If Trump can stand up and say, we're not going to allow this to happen, we're going to have the mother of all bombs, which is the one you were talking about, Richard, that was going to, that we will drop on you, and we're not going to apologize for it. And we'll do it again. And, if he doesn't want to get involved in Syria, fine. So you drop a few big bombs, and that sends a message. And then you don't need to be involved. When you're a strong leader who walks the walk and talks the talk, both, and has moral clarity about what's good and what's evil, then you have a lot easier time, because people, especially people that are weaker than you, tend to line up. When you're a leader from behind, as Obama was, it's hardly a leader, or a non-leader as Biden was, then the world walks all over you, and the bad actors walk all over you.
Let me remind people that today's episode of the reality show is sponsored by James Brown's new book, A Black Hole in Economics, Money Creation and Its Consequences. Let me read you a little bit from the introduction. This book is for anyone who wants to understand money creation in modern economy. In the following pages, I'll explain how money is created, who creates it, and the consequences of money creation, both good and bad. Whether you're an investor navigating volatile markets, a student searching for understanding, or a conscientious voter who wants to stay well informed, this book is for you. Get ready to have your assumptions challenged as we dive headfirst into what I call the black hole of economic knowledge. After reading this book, you'll emerge with insights that will transform your perspective on money, banks, and their impact on life. You can find out more following the Amazon link in the chat and in the description. And remember, all proceeds go to the support of Ayn Rand Centre UK, so you can find out more about money itself, which is, as I always say, the most important technology in human existence, because it allows for money, for the trade of production, and also a preservation of production for future consumption. And what drives it, I think, is really important. What drives money creation is a really important topic to find out more about. And you can do that by reading Jim Brown's book. So going back now, I just wanted to read the story. So the United States and Turkey have reached an agreement to ensure safe withdrawal of US-backed Kurdish Syrian forces from the besieged town of Manbij, a Syrian opposition source said on Monday. So this happened just right when we started the reality show. That town was the town I mentioned at the start, that when it came to the clashes, that basically Syrian-backed militias have already overtaken a town. And despite Biden's comment about don't do anything, although I guess Biden's mentioned specific parts of the Kurdish, control in the northeast of Syria, so maybe they didn't attack those specific parts, so it's okay. But they're already doing deals about the withdrawal of the Syrian forces from one of the cities. So we are already seeing compromise. We are already seeing sort of surrendering to really the bad forces in the region, which again, not great to see. But sort of another topic I wanted to bring up, since we have about 10 minutes left. Oftentimes, when it came to Syria, people are talking about the idea of decentralization or sort of autonomy. When it comes to, let's say, parts of Iraq, the northern parts of Iraq, the Kurds in there have a sort of like a de facto autonomy, sort of like they have control over more of the things, the central government has less. And that's something that people were proposing for Syria. Why try to have it all in one nation? Just split it into into different parts based on ideological lines, based on ethnic parts, based on whatever you want. And I was sort of wondering what you guys think about this idea, because whenever people talk about sort of like splitting among ethnic lines or splitting among something, it allows for the sort of I think Ayn Rand talked about it, what is it, global balkanization, this sort of like every single sort of group. And also once you start dividing into groups, you can always go further. I mean, when we're talking about the Kurdish parts, it's not like only Kurds live there. There's a lot of different ethnic groups. And even then, even not every Kurd is the same. It's not like every Kurd has a exact same ideology and it's not like every single American has like the same ideology, the same sort of beliefs in life. And so sort of, advocating for that, while I sort of can get the appeal. I think once you accept that, no, we are not united based on, some common values, based on some common ideology. It's just we are all the same skin color, or we are all same, you know, we were all born in this region, so it somehow makes us united. I think once you accept that, I think it allows for just sort of endless sort of maybe not necessarily civil war, but sort of like conflict of there's always more groups you can bring in. I mean, Michael, what do you think about this idea of splitting it into some sort of autonomies, or some kind of decentralization, some kind of, maybe it is all one nation Syria, but only for the seat in the UN, and in all other aspects, it's just a bunch of different groups, different tribes.
Yeah, look, I think this is an extraordinarily difficult question. You're not dealing with, sorry, a new country like, and you'll pardon my American centrism here, but America was formed by a whole bunch of different people, and we've certainly had our share of ethnic and racial problems. But we are a country that has large numbers of minority ethnic groups, and most of them are treated pretty much equally. Of course, there's racism and oppression and all this stuff, but overall, we do pretty well. In the Middle East, I don't think that's the case, with the exception of Israel. The only country that actually has a standing number of Arabs, which is, I think, 15 to 20% of the country is Arab. I believe it's closer to 20, almost 2 million out of the almost 10 million that we have. We have Christians, who I think are a bit less, and then we have Jews, who I think are the majority, but not by a hell of a lot. And that's the only country in the Middle East that actually has growing populations of its minority groups, its non-state groups. Lebanon's a great example of a country that has crushed the people that are not Muslim. The Christian population has been decimated. They've been oppressed, particularly in Beirut, where there was a large Christian population. It's decimated. And the country has not respected its Christian minorities now. There are no Jews left in almost every Middle Eastern state. I mean, everyone talks about, crying about how terrible the Jews are in Israel, but the only country in the Middle East that hasn't expelled its minorities, expelled them, is Israel. I just don't know if it's too much to ask a government to truly respect all of its minorities and all of its people. And while I completely agree with you, the Kurds, in theory, you should be able to have different people and different things. But we saw even in some of the old states in Europe were broken up along ethnic lines. And when we saw Czechoslovakia split up, we saw Serbia. We've seen terrible civil wars along racial lines or ethnic lines. And I just don't know if it's too much. I personally would think the Kurds, if they want their region, let them have their region. I'd rather see a decent Kurdish country and a decent Muslim country, whatever it'll be, if it can be a Muslim country, especially that respected women. If that's what it takes to break it up, okay. But I'm sorry, I'm not able to give. I usually can give a definitive answer here, but I'm really up in the air about it.
Yeah, I mean, just quickly because you brought up the example of Europe, and sort of that's almost my argument against sort of these ethnic lines, because when the first time the sort of the idea of ethnic nationalism, the first idea of uniting around some nationality in like the middle of 19th century, and then sort of in the early 20th century when we the concept of ethnic determination or self-determination came about, and was used as like let's just create these states amongst ethnic lines. Then 20 years later, the same argument was used by Hitler by saying, well, I'm just reconnecting back my people. So that's why whenever people talk about ethnic self-determination, that's the sort of thing that my mind jumps towards. Like, once you accept that we can invade the nation or we can take over part of the nation. I mean, that's the same reason that Russia has been using. It's Russians living in eastern Ukraine. We're just uniting the Russian people. But I mean, Marco, any thoughts on this idea of both ethnic self-determination and sort of splitting up Syria?
Yeah, well, the whole point of a country, and a country only works if it's the choice of free, rational people that get together in order to determine the way they run their own affairs. So if you start putting something irrational like ethnicity in it, something which has got nothing to do with choosing the freedom of the individual as the main purpose, well, you're doomed from the start. You're setting something up which is doomed to fail. We've seen it in the West, we've seen in Europe, we've seen in the, to a certain extent in the East. So yeah, it might work for 15 minutes, for 6 months, 2 years or something, but eventually it was going to fall apart. If anything else, because some of these ethnic groups will be hell-bent into creating a worldwide caliphate, which only sees one religion and one rule. So then they're not going to stop within their boundary and try not to take over the next guy. What I think is kind of makes sense at the moment is Netanyahu kind of extending an olive branch to the Kurds and the Druze in Syria, and making sure that whatever happens with the next political situation in Syria, Israel always has some friends, somebody friendly on the other side, especially when it comes to the Kurds, because they could keep an eye on what Iran and Iraqi are doing. And it would be very valuable intelligence for Israel, and also extending the influence and the amount of support that the only civilized state could perform in the Middle East. And this can only be something good. James, everyone was suggesting that Syria should join Israel, really. The best option for Middle East countries is merge with Israel, roll out the kind of freedom and productivity and inventiveness and love for life that the Israeli have, rather than going down the route of an Iraq or Lebanon or one of the other theocracies.
Yeah, just to quickly jump in, because I realized that it might be possible one big difference. If, for example, and again, it might not be like an ethnic group, but if the people in the northeast Syria say, no, we want a free country, we want a better country, we want to build, pretty much any group or almost all people in Syria have pretty much the right to sort of declare independence and say, no, we do not want to be part of whatever is coming up with the Islamist groups. We want to have a free nation. We want to have a better nation. We want to ally ourselves with America or Israel or something like that. We want to ally ourselves with Western democracies. Then then that argument is that it's pretty clear that they have every right to do so. The only reason why it's sort of a question is that if there are any parts of Syrian society that are sort of like, sort of above the other ones and are able to achieve something better alone rather than, trying to put all of Syria together. Richard?
Yeah, I absolutely agree with what you guys are saying there. I think one aspect that is also not being considered is the returnees from abroad. All of those refugees, the 3+ million in Turkey, there's 1 million Syrian refugees in Germany. Now, not all will want to return, but a significant portion may well do so, and they can be some of the best influence, having experienced some proper functioning Western countries outside of Syria. So they can certainly bring to bear some influence, because it's ultimately up to the people to set their own culture and their own future. I think once you start modeling maps from afar and you're basing it on ethnic lines, that's a mug's game of short duration that's going to only cause problems down the line, as you said. So I think the future is for the people themselves to recognize that you can live as a group of different priority people, so long as you're not forcing anything on anyone else. I mean, it's a simple two-way thing, isn't it? You don't force, you don't use force against them, they don't use force against you, and that's how you live in harmony. So providing you're recognizing the individual rights of people to pursue their lives, whether they choose to follow a dumb religion or not, whether they choose to have a particular emphasis on different things or not, is up to them, so long as they're not forcing other people to adopt exactly the same thing. I mean, obviously, that's a very general statement, but that's at the core of what Rand was talking about, certainly. And I think Syria's best chance is from doing that. And there's undoubtedly going to be a clustering within certain areas where people share certain similar values, and those may well be the Kurds, but even the Kurds themselves will be limiting their potential if they restrict themselves to only ethnic Kurds living there. That they'll be absolutely limiting their future. So it's not just a question of working with other people, but seeing that the future is not about what your hereditary is going back thousands of years or whatever, but it's how you act today.
We have a few super chats from Alex. Thank you so much. She says Syria is not a real country, hasn't been for years. I mean, yeah, when you if you go back to if you look up Syria live war map, there's a good website for it. I think it was originally created for Ukraine and now has expanded to more conflicts. If you go back like 2 weeks, the map you see was pretty much the same for about 5 years. So things haven't changed for the most part for 5 years. And yeah, in some way, it already has been split between 1, 2, 3, 4 sides, depending on how you count. So now the question is there a willingness to really like reunite the nation? And again, what it means with the Kurdish parts, now with the newly taken over Israeli parts, with the parts that were taken over by Turkey, by the Turkey-backed militias, the Russian bases that are still under control of Russia. It's not an easy task if you really are committed to restoring Syria to its full borders, and possibly being the sort of multicultural society that the HTS leader has been talking about. We also have a super chat from Alex again. Thank you so much. She says, Michael, is your phone broken or something? I'm wondering what is that in.
No, we were going back and forth about one of our nice discussions here on this show, and then I somehow dropped her last email, so her last text, so I responded finally.
All right, with that, I mean, Michael, any last thoughts, and also where can people find you?
Yeah, I did. I mean, I agree with Marco and Richard and you, Danielle, in theory. I just don't know if it's too much to ask of these countries, and I sure would love to take HTS's words at face value. But like we say, we'll all see, and we hope people will want to form something that's flourishing. To be a little bit of a cynic, we have a bunch of so-called useful and I think dangerous idiots in America who somehow think that we should avoid flourishing and reverse it, and that's why they're all talking about globalizing the Intifada and so on. But hopefully, there's some emerging cultures that are that are trying to get somewhere for more people and enjoy the fruits of modern life. You can find me on LinkedIn, Kaufman with 2 Fs, Kauffman. Michael, thanks.
Marco, any last thoughts?
Yeah, I cannot help but bristle every time I hear the words strength through diversity, because that's exactly a kind of pap which has been pushed here, certainly in Britain, in order to justify multiculturalism and allow uncivilized cultures to actually take over. So I'm always quite wary about this kind of things. And coming from somebody who was working for al-Baghdadi makes me even more skeptical. But I can only wait and judge the actions rather than what they talk about.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And of course,
we all have our past. I mean, come on, don't.
And of course, if you did want to tout for humanitarian aid, which undoubtedly may be one of the motivations behind saying what the West wants to hear right now, that's what all of this is the stuff you would say. And of course, when it comes to aid and rebuilding of Syria, you need to be very careful who you're rebuilding, even via aid, because obviously, the recent examples only serve that, serve the bad example of where that can lead, for sure. So yeah, time will tell, but we will see.
And with that, and also, where can people find you?
You can certainly check out the Briefly Objective, the sister channel to this, with our short form material edited from this channel with extra visuals, and that's doing quite well at the moment. It's showing a little spurt of growth. So please add to it by liking, commenting, watching, and helping us reach the next milestone of viewership. So thank you.
And also, people should check out Jim Brown's new book, A Black Hole in Economics, Money Creation, and its consequences. Amazon link for that is in the chat and in the description. And also, all royalties go towards the support of Ayn Rand Centre UK, so you can help us keep on the air. Thank you guys for joining me today. Thank you everybody for watching, and bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye.